I'm sitting by the window in a quiet house that feels much bigger than it used to. The afternoon light falls across the floor in the same way it has for years, but everything else has changed. There's a chair across from me that I haven't moved in a long time. It still sits exactly where it always did, as if the man who used to occupy it might walk back in and lower himself into it with that familiar sigh. But he won't. It's been 12 years since he passed, and still I find myself glancing at that empty space like it might answer something I haven't been able to figure out. My name is Thomas. I'm 79 years old, and I spend most of my life working as a mechanic in a small town where nothing much ever changed. I fixed engines, replaced worn out parts, kept things running. That's what I was good at, taking something broken and making it functional again. What I didn't know how to fix, what I didn't even realize was slowly wearing down, was the life I was living at home. I want to tell you about something my wife once asked me near the end of her life. It wasn't a complicated question. It wasn't poetic or dramatic, but it stayed with me, and over the years it has grown heavier, like something I should have understood right away but didn't. Maybe you're younger and think you'll have time to figure these things out later. I thought that too. Time feels endless until it isn't. When I was young, life felt very straightforward. You worked, you earned, you built something stable. That was the goal. I met Helen when I was 23. She was 21, working at a small diner near the garage where I had just started full time. She wasn't loud or attention grabbing. She had this quiet way about her, like she was always thinking something she didn't say out loud. I remember noticing that more than anything else. We didn't fall in love in the way people describe in movies. There was no overwhelming feeling, no sense that the world had shifted. It was simpler than that. We got along. We understood each other's routines. We laughed sometimes, mostly about small, ordinary things. It felt easy, and back then, easy felt like the right choice. So we got married. I was 25. She was 23. The ceremony was small, just family and a few friends. I remember standing there thinking, not about the future, not about love or what kind of life we'd build together, but about responsibility. This is what you do, I told myself. You grow up, you settle down, you make something stable. And we did. The early years were quiet in a good way. We didn't have much money, but we didn't need much either. We lived in a small house with thin walls and a backyard that took more effort to maintain than it should have. Helen would make dinner every evening, and I'd come home from the garage covered in grease and tired in a way that felt honest. We'd sit at the table, sometimes talking, sometimes just eating in comfortable silence. Back then, we had moments, not big ones, not the kind you remember for a lifetime, but small, steady moments. She'd ask me about my day, and I'd tell her about a stubborn engine or a customer who didn't want to pay. I'd ask her about the neighbors or what she did with her afternoon. It wasn't deep, but it was something. It was connection, even if we didn't recognize it as that. I remember she used to sit close to me on the couch in the evenings, not saying much, just leaning slightly into my side while we watched whatever happened to be on television. I never thought much about it. It felt normal. It felt like something that would always be there. And maybe that was my first mistake. I assumed everything would always be there. As the years went on, life got busier. We had children, 3 of them, over the span of 8 years. Suddenly, everything revolved around schedules, responsibilities, keeping things running. I worked longer hours at the garage, taking extra shifts whenever they were available. I told myself I was doing it for the family, for security, for a better future. Helen didn't complain. She never really complained about anything. She just adjusted. took care of the house, the kids, the endless list of things that needed to be done every day. We became efficient, the two of us, like parts in a machine, each doing our role to keep everything moving. And slowly, without either of us noticing, something changed. The conversations became shorter, more practical, less about sharing, more about coordinating. Did you pay the bill? The car needs gas. Don't forget the appointment on Thursday. We still spoke every day, but we stopped really talking. I didn't think it mattered. At the time, it felt like this was just how life worked. You grow up, you get busy, you handle your responsibilities. The closeness you had when you were younger fades, but that's normal, isn't it? That's what I believe. There were moments, if I'm honest, when I noticed the distance. Times when I'd walk into a room and find Helen sitting quietly, staring at nothing in particular, like she was somewhere else entirely. I'd ask if she was okay, and she'd always say yes. And I always accepted that answer. I never asked twice. I never sat down beside her and said, "Tell me what you're really thinking." I didn't know how to do that. It wasn't something I'd ever learned. So I kept doing what I knew. I worked. I provided. I fixed what was broken. I told myself that was enough. Years passed like that, faster than I expected. The kids grew up and left. One by one, the house got quieter. You'd think that would have brought us closer again, but it didn't. By then, we had gotten used to living alongside each other rather than with each other. We had our routine. I'd sit in my chair in the evenings, watching television or reading the newspaper. Helen spent more time in the kitchen or in the bedroom, reading or just keeping herself occupied. We still ate dinner together, but the conversations never really changed. Weather, health, small updates about the children, nothing that required us to open up, nothing that required us to be seen. I remember one evening, not long after I turned 60, Helen had made dinner like she always did, and we were sitting across from each other at the table. There was nothing wrong, nothing broken. Everything was as it had always been, and yet I had this strange feeling I couldn't quite explain. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't know what she was thinking. I didn't know what she wanted out of life anymore. I didn't know if she was happy. And instead of asking, instead of leaning into that moment, I looked back down at my plate and kept eating. Because asking would have meant opening something I didn't understand. It would have meant risking an answer I wasn't prepared for. So I stayed quiet. That became the pattern of our life. Not unhappy, not broken, just quiet. We didn't argue, we didn't fight, we didn't hurt each other in obvious ways. But we also didn't reach for each other the way we once had. We didn't question the distance that had settled between us. We accepted it. We lived inside it. And for a long time, I told myself that was enough. The first time something truly broke through that quiet routine was the day we got the diagnosis. It was a cold morning, the kind where the air feels too still, like the world is holding its breath. Helen had been feeling tired for months, but we both dismissed it. Age, we said, just getting older. That's what we told ourselves because it was easier than imagining anything else. The doctor didn't take long to say the words. Lung cancer, advanced. Not something that could be fixed with time or effort or determination. I remember sitting there nodding like I understood, like I was following along with everything he was explaining, but the truth is I didn't hear most of it. All I could think was that this wasn't something I could repair. There was no part to replace, no tool to use, no way to make it run again. For the first time in my life, I was completely useless. We drove home in silence, not an uncomfortable silence, just the kind we had lived in for years. Familiar, safe, but underneath it, something else had started to move, something I didn't know how to name. The house felt different when we walked in. Same furniture, same walls, same quiet hum of the refrigerator, but Everything felt fragile, like it could disappear if I looked at it the wrong way. The days after that blurred together at first. Appointments, tests, conversations with doctors who spoke in careful tones. Words like time and comfort started to replace words like treatment and recovery. And slowly, it became clear that we weren't talking about fixing anything anymore. We were talking about how to spend what was left, and that's when something changed between us. The routines we had built our lives around started to fall away. They didn't matter anymore. The small tasks, the habits, the distance, we couldn't hide behind them like we used to. I found myself sitting with her more. Not because I suddenly knew how to be present, but because there was nowhere else to go. At first, we didn't know what to say. After decades of surface level conversations, the idea of talking about anything real felt almost unnatural. We would sit in the living room, the television on, but ignored, both of us aware of the silence in a way we hadn't been before. But then slowly the words started to come. Not all at once, not dramatically, just small things. One afternoon, she told me she used to want to travel, not anywhere specific, just anywhere. She said it in a quiet voice, like she wasn't sure it mattered anymore. I remember feeling surprised, not because it was a big dream, but because I had never heard her say it before. All those years, and I hadn't known something so simple about her. I told her I had always wanted to open my own garage, not work for someone else, not follow someone else's rules. I had thought about it when I was younger, even saved a little money for it. But then life got busy, responsibilities piled up, and I let the idea go. We talked about things like that, little pieces of ourselves we had never shared. It felt strange at first, like we were learning how to speak a new language, but it also felt important, like we were finally seeing each other in a way we never had before. I started noticing things about her that I had overlooked for years. The way she would pause before answering a question, like she was carefully choosing her words. The way her hands moved when she talked, small, almost hesitant gestures. The way she looked at me sometimes, like she was trying to understand something she couldn't quite reach. And for the first time in a long time, I wondered what she had seen when she looked at me all those years. Had she felt alone? Had she been waiting for me to notice? Those thoughts stayed with me, but I didn't always say them out loud. Old habits don't disappear overnight. Even with time running out, it was hard to break the patterns we had lived in for decades. But we tried in our own quiet way. There was one evening I remember more clearly than the others. We were sitting in the living room, the light fading outside, casting long shadows across the floor. Helen was in her chair, a blanket over her lap, and I was across from her. She looked tired, more than usual, but her eyes were clear. She looked at me, really looked at me, the way I hadn't seen her do in years. And she said, "Do you think we did it right?" It wasn't what I expected. I thought she might ask about the kids, or about the house, or about something practical. But that's not what she asked. She was asking about us, about the life we had built together, about whether it had been enough. I felt something tighten in my chest when she said it. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wasn't sure if the answer I had was true. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that we had done everything we were supposed to do, that we had raised good children, kept a stable home, avoided the kind of problems that ruin people's lives. And in a way, that was all true. But that wasn't really what she was asking. She wasn't asking if we had survived. She was asking if we had lived. And I didn't know how to answer that. So I did what I had always done when faced with something I didn't understand. I kept it simple. I said, "We did our best." She held my gaze for a moment longer, like she was searching for something in my face. Then she nodded, slowly, and leaned back into her chair. She didn't say anything else, and I didn't add anything. But that moment stayed with me, because even as I said the words, I felt the weight of everything they didn't include. All the things we hadn't said, all the things we hadn't asked, all the ways we had kept ourselves just slightly out of reach from each other. Over the next few weeks, her condition got worse. The conversations became shorter again, not because we didn't want to talk, but because she didn't have the strength. I found myself sitting beside her bed, watching her breathe, trying to think of something meaningful to say. But meaningful words don't come easily when you've spent a lifetime avoiding them. So I held her hand, something I hadn't done enough of when it would have been easier, something that now felt both natural and painfully late. In those final days, I kept thinking about our life together. Not the big moments, not the milestones people talk about, but the ordinary ones, the thousands of small, quiet moments we had shared without really seeing them. Mornings at the kitchen table, evenings in front of the television, nights lying side by side, not speaking, all that time, all those chances to know each other better, and I had let them pass by without question. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to show that I did. She passed away early one morning just before sunrise. The house was completely still. I was sitting beside her, holding her hand, feeling the weight of everything I had never said pressing down on me. And in that moment, I realized something I wish I had understood much earlier. Being there isn't the same as truly being present. Staying isn't the same as connecting. And time doesn't wait for you to figure it out. The years after she was gone didn't pass the way I expected them to. People told me time would make things easier, that the sharpness of the loss would dull, that I would adjust to the quiet. And in some ways, they were right. The house became something I could move through without feeling like every corner was echoing her absence. I learned how to fill my days again, how to keep myself busy in small, manageable ways. But what never really faded was the understanding that came too late. It settled into me slowly, like something I couldn't unsee once I had noticed it. I started thinking less about the fact that she was gone, and more about the years when she was still here, and how little I had truly been present for them. I would sit in the same chair I had always sat in, and my mind would wander back to ordinary days. Not the big memories people talk about at funerals, not birthdays or holidays or milestones, just regular days. A Tuesday afternoon, a quiet dinner, a moment where she was in the same room and I had chosen not to look up. And those were the moments that stayed with me the most, not because they were special, but because they could have been. I began to understand that a life isn't made up of the big events. It's built from thousands of small chances to notice someone, to ask something deeper, to reach just a little further than what feels comfortable. And I had spent most of those chances doing what felt safe instead, being reliable, being consistent, being there, but not really seeing her. That question she asked me, "Do you think we did it right?" It didn't leave me. In fact, it grew louder over time. At first, I thought about it in a practical way. We had raised our children. We had kept a roof over our heads. We had avoided the kind of chaos that breaks families apart. By those standards, we had done everything right. But the older I got, the more I realized that wasn't the whole truth. Because doing things right on the surface doesn't mean you live deeply underneath it. We had built a life that worked, it functioned, it held together, but we never pushed beyond that. We never asked ourselves if it was meaningful in the way it could have been. We didn't challenge each other. We didn't open up. We didn't take the risk of being fully known. And at the time, that felt like peace. It felt like stability. It felt like we were avoiding problems. But now I see it differently. We weren't avoiding problems. We were avoiding depth. There's a difference. A life without conflict isn't always a life full of connection. Sometimes it just means two people have learned how to stay quiet. I think about all the times I could have asked her something real. What do you actually want from life? Are you happy with me? Do you feel seen? Simple questions, but they require courage. They require a willingness to hear an answer that might change things. And I didn't have that courage. Not because I was a bad man. I don't think I was. I cared about her. I provided. I stayed loyal. I did everything I thought a good husband was supposed to do. But I confused duty with love. I thought showing up physically was enough. I thought staying meant we were doing it right. Now I understand that staying is just the beginning. What matters is how you show up while you're there. Do you listen? Do you notice? Do you let the other person see who you really are, even if it's uncomfortable? I didn't do those things, not the way I should have, and she didn't either. We both lived inside the same quiet understanding of what marriage was supposed to be. We followed the rules we had been given, never stopping to question if those rules were enough to build something truly meaningful. And for a long time, it felt fine. That's the part that's hardest to explain. It didn't feel wrong while we were living it. It just felt normal. That's why it's so easy to miss. You don't realize you're slowly drifting apart when the distance builds inch by inch over years. You only see it when something forces you to stop and look directly at it. For us, that moment came too late. In those last months, when everything else fell away, we finally started to see each other clearly, not as roles, not as responsibilities, but as people. And it was beautiful in a quiet, painful way, because it showed me what had been possible all along. We didn't suddenly become different people. We didn't transform into something we had never been. We simply allowed ourselves to be more honest, more open, more present. And that was enough to change everything, even though it only lasted a short time. That's what I carry with me now. Not just the regret, but the understanding that it didn't have to be that way. We had decades to ask, to listen, to connect, and we waited until there was no time left. If you're listening to me now and you still have time, I want you to understand something that took me most of my life to learn. Love isn't just about staying. It's not just about loyalty or responsibility or doing what's expected of you. Those things matter, yes, they hold a life together, but they don't make it meaningful on their own. Real love requires attention. It requires curiosity. It requires the willingness to step out of your comfort and actually know the person sitting across from you. Ask them questions you've never asked. Listen to the answers, even if they surprise you. Don't assume you already know everything about them just because you've spent years together. People change. Feelings change. And if you're not paying attention, you can lose each other without ever realizing it. I used to think time was something you could count on, that there would always be another evening, another conversation, another chance to say what needed to be said. But time is quieter than that. It doesn't announce when it's running out. It just keeps moving. And one day, you find yourself sitting in a quiet house, looking at an empty chair, wishing you had asked one more question, wishing you had listened a little more carefully, wishing you had been just a little more present. I don't live in constant regret. That's not what this is. I'm grateful for the life we had, for the stability, for the partnership, for the way we stood by each other through everything, even if we didn't always understand each other the way we could have. There was love there, just not the kind that grows when it's given room to breathe. And if I could go back, I wouldn't change the big things. I wouldn't change the house or the work or the life we built. I would change the small things. The moments where I chose silence instead of curiosity, distance instead of closeness, comfort instead of truth, because those are the moments that shape everything. I'm 79 now. I've had a lot of time to think about all of this, and I know I can't go back. I can't ask her the questions I should have asked. I can't give her the version of me that I understand now. All I can do is sit here in this quiet house and hope that someone else hears this before it's too late for them. If you have someone in your life, don't just stay. Be there, really be there, because one day staying will be the only thing you have left, and you'll realize it was never meant to be the only thing that mattered.